By the way, ITIF also released a new report this morning analyzing how innovative is China in quantum computing. You can find that on our website, itif.org. Let me just ask two questions to our panelists, because we're short on time, and then we'll open up to the audience. But the first question would be, this is a phenomenal vision that you have all laid out. Well, what's going to be the biggest challenge to implementing your visions?
All right, I'll start. And I know we're behind on schedule, so I won't give you the whole answer. The biggest thing to me that I found was interesting in talking with people who have been working on the EU CHIPS Act is that we're actually trying to sort of fundamentally change the landscape here in the US. So in the EU CHIPS Act, you have the opportunity to sort of fund some of these existing entities, whether it's IMEC, LEDI, Fraunhofer. There are these mature entities that have been there for a long time that are really able to sort of build, and grow research culture and target certain technologies. And one strategy that we could have taken with CHIPS R&D, and it's not a crazy idea, but would be just to fund what's out there. So fund universities more, fund companies more, just sort of sprinkle the money around and try to make them better. But what we are doing is a little bit different and I think harder. And actually trying to build some of these institutions, build an Natcast as sort of one of these institutions that really makes everybody else better. And that is taking a little bit longer, but like Susan said, I think by the end of this year we're going to have a lot of stuff up and going, and certainly through next year, fully expect this program to be sort of off to the races. So, with a little bit of patience, I think it'll be worth it.
I think one of the challenges is that we're saying we want to engage the whole ecosystem. And we know that not everyone has the same priorities. So dealing with a lot of different interests, because we want to provide value to all. So you can see how we're trying to set up a broad spectrum of offerings in order to engage everyone. And I think it is challenging to be doing this all at once, but we're up for the challenge.
I think my team would say one challenge is there's never going to be enough data. They wish they could have more from the trade angle. We're just realizing that our system doesn't really capture what we'd like to have captured that would allow us to run like a quick analysis. That's like kind of almost an easy one, but it actually turns out to be kind of tricky. But I think in the big picture, a lot of the work we're doing, I think, is the right work. It's the intense, relationship building and trying to build new entities. And I think the challenge is how do we do that when we have an adversary nation that's just running so much faster and dumping so much more money, and that's just like this pressure that I think is on a lot of our systems. And so trying to retain like our values and vision in the scope of a very competitive landscape, that's just causing a lot of stress, and I think that's something that's not going to go away, basically.
I think we also want to be working across, and we don't want to be duplicative in what we're standing up, because while it may sound like it's a lot of money, it goes quickly, and when you want to do as much as you're doing. So we want to make sure that we're complementing each other, that we're working across, we're partnering not only within the United States but across the world in these, so that we can take advantage and leverage the investment that's being made.
Right, so we have our CHIPS Act, the EU has their CHIPS Act, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Israel put in place their own CHIPS Act. So how can we actually collaborate with these countries? Where are the real, genuine collaboration opportunities, or is it just brass tack competition amongst countries for leadership in these industries?
I'll start if that's all right. Actually, I think it's in what we're doing. It's R&D. Pre-competitive work I think it is just as difficult to enable and facilitate collaboration between semiconductor companies as it is between different countries. And that's exactly sort of the space that we're trying to live is in that sort of pre-competitive space where we're able to sort of de-risk technologies. Companies are a little bit more willing to partner. I think by exactly the same sort of reasoning, there are going to be a lot of opportunities to partner globally. I think it's going to be very important. Susan mentioned the funding only goes so far. We have a much longer list of things I wish we could be doing than we can actually do. And so if we're actually working together, working in a collaborative and complementary way, then I think there are a lot of good opportunities there.
I mean, I don't think any country can do it all themselves, actually, at the end of the day. So it's not even really an option. So I think that's the good news. I can see a lot of good work has been going on trying to sort of shed light on how some of these other countries that are not the ones you named can kind of get in this game as well. And I'm actually looking over at Eric's, like SIA just put out an assessment somewhat recently. What are those policy environments? What kind of dynamics need to be in place to make it so that some of these other countries can kind of enter this fray and be really shining opportunity spaces for some of the semiconductor ecosystem. So even later this week, we're having the first in-person meeting of the IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework Supply Chain Council, where they're gonna, all these 14 countries are gonna surround a table and agree on some areas that they wanna work on supply chains. And it's very possible that some aspect of semiconductors is one of those. We don't know, and then they'll have to reach agreement. But I think there's enough room for everybody, but we have to move fast, and it's gonna be a bit challenging, but I'm a little optimistic on that side.
So in 1990, the United States manufactured 37% of the world's semiconductors. By 2020, that had fallen about 10 to 12%. There was a 70 percentage point decline in US manufacturing of chips over a 30-year period. That was certainly one motivating factor for Congress to build the CHIPS Act. Another was that the mere chips shortage we faced during the end of the pandemic knocked off $230 billion of global GDP, including a half a percentage point of US GDP. So I think a $52 billion investment was well worth it. But the question is, when Congress, when policymakers, and the American public at the end of this decade looks at the CHIPS Act, how will we know if it's been successful by the end of this decade?
I don't want to take that one. I mean, I think we've set some markers, yeah. Right? There will be more production in this country, in the U.S., of leading edge chips for sure.
Yeah, as Secretary said, I think by 2030, expect to have 20% of the world's global production of leading edge chips in this country. I think that's a great target. And I think you can sort of draw similar, metrics across workforce, across other kinds of technologies, and not to mention, I think the general supply chain, which and the fragility of the supply chain, sort of coming into this, is I think another thing to look for as we move forward.
I think those will be easy. The manufacturing, the workforce might be easier things to measure. I think our long-term, position and leadership and how we're doing with the R&D could be harder to judge because that takes a little bit longer to come to fruition. But we should be, there's probably things that we could be tracking with regard to that will give, to make us, aware of whether we're on the right trajectory or not.
Great. I think Eric, you'll tell us what we're 67,000 individuals short of what we need by the end of this decade in terms of the talent workforce. I would mark that as another proof point for me to build the talent base here in America that we need. Okay, let's open the floor to questions for our audience. I believe we have folks with mics if anybody's got a question. If you do, let us know the organization you're with, your name. Go ahead.
Thank you. Andrew Durack from Durack, Australia. I'm interested for the new NSTC and Natcast. You mentioned that there was going to be a dedicated facility for EUV. Can you say a little bit more about that? What is the aim and mission of that particular new facility?
I don't get it.
Go for it.
That's a technology that's going to be needed for the future, and we don't know that is going to be coexisting in the prototype facility we're going to be standing at. So we separated it out, knowing that it's limited to where those facilities could be in the United States that would host that equipment that's going to be needed for the future developments of advanced technologies here. Does that answer your question?
Kind of.
What?
Is the aim to do EUV R&D, or is it to augment existing? Because there's only a couple of companies. There's only a couple of companies, obviously, that are in the EUV space, given how expensive these facilities are. So is the aim to augment organisations such as Intel? I know TSMC is setting up in Arizona. or is it going to be a new standalone R&D centre? Is there any view on that as yet?
So I think it's meant to be collaborative, certainly among the companies that you mentioned, but who may have their own sort of access and ability to do development, but also to reach out to many of the other companies who have the opportunity to innovate, whether it's material suppliers, mass technologies, metrology technologies, like the many other things that sort of facilitate that entire sort of tech base, but who may not have quite such easy access. So I think that it's all of the above, and making sure that people have easier access, and that can hopefully then sort of see more rapid innovation and bring new people to the conversation, not sort of be beholden to a particular company that they're forced to work with.
Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. Right behind you.
Hi, my name is Constanza Aguilar Bustamante. I'm a fellow with the Center for New American Security, CNAS. We're a think tank based in DC. And my question was mostly for Heather. I wanted to ask whether you can say more about, you mentioned having a very data-driven approach to mapping supply chains, and you also mentioned there's never going to be enough data. I was curious if you could elaborate a bit on that, on what are the data sources that you found most helpful, like where are you collecting the data? Are you using data from collecting from industry, forming partnerships there for data sharing, and what are the data that you think you don't have yet that you wish you did?
So yeah, I think all of those things that you mentioned are things that are of interest. The trade data in particular, I'm learning a lot, and actually Melissa next to you is learning a lot about this also. With certain categories of technologies, it's just not tracked at the right level that you'd like to have to be able to trace supply chains. And part of that's because it's an emerging area. Like hydrogen so the hydrogen economy here, we're really trying to build it out very rapidly, especially with some of the federal funding. But it's kind of hard to do some of the analysis just because everything is sort of clumped under one trade code. And I'm becoming more of an expert in this, but part of it, there's ways to fix that. It just takes time and knowledge of what exactly you want to track. And also, so anyway, that's like really kind of in the weeds, but that's a very trade data specific thing. To your question though, I think what we're finding is that we need to use a combination of data sources. Some of those are privately held data sets that we purchase. Some are things that we might just collect on our own. The tool that's going to be talked about tomorrow at the event is called the Scale tool. That's something that my colleagues in the department have built. And that actually takes, I believe, something like 40 different risk categories and sort of tries to weigh them. And so that's a much more analytical approach that is a new way of looking at some of this, and it's really going to be informative, I think, in the discussions we have within government, and maybe help shed light on some of these trends that are not so obvious. That's the hope. But there's going to be more to come on that. I just wanted to kind of throw it out as a teaser.
Let me ask one final question for our panel. You've talked about this whole government approach, all these different agencies and actors in government supporting the U.S. semiconductor industry. What lessons do you think we've already learned so far in terms of how we set this up to support America's semiconductor industry that we can translate to supporting America's quantum computing industry?
Money helps.
Do we
like having tens of
do we need
billions of dollars.
manufacturing? Do we need the Manufacturing USA Institute for quantum? I mean, do we need the Quantum Act like we created the CHIPS Act?
There is a quantum.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Look,
but a $52 billion one.
I think you're not going to be able to do a cookie cutter just like the CHIPS Act for everything, but we're seeing there's a lot of technology sectors where there's a similar opportunity and financial gap that might need to be met by the U.S. government. So I do think there's some reasoning there, but I guess it took only about 2 years to get this legislation. I mean, it's not an easy fix. And also we're already saying kind of what Susan said, we're not going to say this. I want to be polite about it, but $50 billion isn't actually that much money. And so I don't think we can buy ourselves out of this through that same mechanism all the time. But certainly I would think you guys are able to do some amazing new things with these resources and with this program that we could never have done without it. So
I do think that we should be working together in areas that we do overlap. Mm-hmm. Workforce development being a primary example of that, is to coordinate the initiatives, because one thing, there's so many initiatives going on, and we need to make sure that we're sharing best practices and amplifying those programs that work across the nation. And I think it's just as applicable to the quantum world.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I might add, I think, there's just depending on where you come from, probably a lot of different opinions about the long history of, government trying to get involved in different industries with sometimes success and sometimes not. I think hopefully this gave people a little bit of confidence that, within these kinds of technologies, in advanced technology, innovation areas, where there really is sort of a global race, maybe to not be so reluctant to give it a shot.
Excellent. Well, Susan, Jay, Heather, thank you so much
Thank you,
for your
Stephen.
great presentations and your remarks in the Q&A. Thank you.